What's up guys, welcome back to Phil Always Wins. Today we are going to be breaking down the full card of UFC 330, Islam Makachev taking on Garry. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow me on Instagram to be the first to know about my weekly UFC betting tips. To kick off the night, we have a light heavyweight fight between Fernando and Rafael Tobias, where I think that Fernando is going to get the win. Now to be honest, I think that the betting line is too wide to bet on Fernando because this is a closer fight than the odds suggest. You see, Tobias is a dangerous power puncher who always has the ability to change the momentum of the fight with just one clean combination. He's the type of fighter that doesn't need to be winning every striking exchange because his power gives him that chance to find a knockout at any given moment. If he was fighting a points fighter that was trying to grind out a decision win, then I would probably favor Tobias to get the win because he'll more than likely land at least one clean combination within 15 minutes and he'll probably find a knockout. But the problem is that Fernando is also live to find the finish and he has the perfect mix of speed and power in his hands, and I think that his speed advantage is going to be the story of this fight. He does a good job of mixing in shots to the head and body, and because Tobias is so slow, I think that Fernando will be able to land his combinations and get out of range before Tobias fires back. Tobias is already slow, and the longer this fight goes, the only slower he will get. And so as long as Fernando stays defensively responsible early on in the fight, I think he's going to find a knockout in round 2. Next up, we have a welterweight fight between Jeremiah Wells and Mytebek Orolbai. And Orolbai is the lock of the card for me because this is a major drop in competition for him. Orolbai has wins over dangerous strikers like Uras Medic, talented grapplers like Tofik, and well-rounded fighters like Chris Curtis, and so I doubt that Jeremiah will give him any trouble in any sort of way. In my opinion, as of currently, Orolbai has the best pressure wrestling in the welterweight division. He can constantly shoot for takedowns the entire fight without getting tired, and he's also got so much strength in his arms because he's able to bully bigger fighters than him and hold them down against the cage and on the ground. Jeremiah, on the other hand, was literally struggling to defend takedowns in his last fight against Garimbo, who isn't even that good of a grappler, and the only reason he was able to start defending those takedowns from round 2 and onwards was because Garimbo started to gas out and slow down. Jeremiah needs to pray that Orolbai slows down and starts to shoot sloppy takedowns so that he can try and keep this fight standing. But I don't think that that's going to happen, and I think that Orolbai is going to effortlessly take Jeremiah down time and time again until he eventually finds a submission in round 2. Next up, we have a lightweight bout between Fernandes and Jalin Turner, and in my opinion, this fight could go either way, but I'm favoring the underdog Fernandes to get the win because I don't trust Turner's mentality. Turner lost 2 fights in a row against Bahamundes and Moicano, and although those are very respectable opponents, he looked like he almost gave up in those fights, and after those 2 losses, he publicly stated that he was considering to retire early on in his career. Obviously, he didn't end up retiring, and he came back and knocked Barboza out in his last fight, but let's be real, he fought a 39-year-old on a losing streak, and now everyone thinks he's back in business, and I just don't buy it. I think that this fight is going to be the true test to see if Turner's mentality is really back, because Fernandes is a very confident fighter that's currently on a 3-fight winning streak. Fernandes' biggest weapon is his hard low kicks, and he's effectively used them in all 3 of his last UFC wins, where his opponents were all limping at some point in the fight. His wide karate stance allows him to throw his kicks with so much force, and his game plan is always to try and chew up your lead leg to take away any power you have on the feet, and once he's done that, he starts opening up more with his hands. The threat of his low kicks is so crucial because that allows him to control the distance, but the reason he's the underdog for this matchup is because he's still relatively new in the UFC, and we've never seen him do that against a highly experienced fighter that's also longer and taller than him, just like Jalin Turner. I do see Turner standing a bit flat-footed at times, and so I reckon that Fernandes will start chopping at the legs of Turner and slowly break him down until he gives up and gets TKO'd in round 3. Next up, we have a welterweight fight between Magney and Ramiz Brahimaj, and I'm going to be backing Ramiz to get the win. A Magney fight is always an unpredictable fight because you just don't know which version of him is going to show up, and although he's a pick'em for this fight, he's usually a live underdog to bet on because he's got a lot of UFC experience. But I think that the main problem for Magney is that he's already reached Unk status in the UFC, and he's not as dangerous as he used to be. Now, Ramiz isn't the best fighter either, but because of his youth, I trust that he'll be able to recover better if he does get hurt, or if he gets taken down. Ramiz's game plan is probably going to be to try and get past Magney's long reach by taking him down and trying to find a submission as soon as possible. You should never count Magney out, but I do think that Ramiz will breeze past him and get that takedown, and I reckon that he'll find a submission in round 2. Next up, we have a middleweight bout between Treasean, Gore, Vincente, Luque, and I'm leaning towards Gore to get the win because I think that he's entering this fight at the right time of his career, whereas I'm still not convinced that Luque is the same fighter he once was, despite looking impressive in his last fight, which was his middleweight debut. Gore is riding a lot of momentum after not just winning, but dominating his last fight against Azamat, where he came into that fight as a plus 400 underdog. Luque is also coming off a submission win against Kelvin Gastelum, but I honestly wasn't impressed with how he performed on the feet because he just seemed very stiff and hittable. If he fights as flat-footed as he did in his last fight, then Luque is bound to get caught badly because Gore is the faster and more explosive striker that's able to fight at a very high pace. Luque needs to get this fight grounded as soon as possible because that's where he has a clear advantage, but he almost never initiates the takedowns and he prefers to stand and strike. I think that that's going to be a big problem for him because Gore has also been in more wars where he's shown that he's got the heart to keep on fighting, and I just don't think that Luque is going to bring anything that Gore hasn't already seen on the feet. And so I reckon that Gore is going to force Luque to start exchanging heavy shots early on in the fight until he finds a knockout in round 2. Next up, we have a welterweight fight between Donte Johnson and McConico, where I think that Johnson is going to get the win. Donte is the more well-rounded fighter in this matchup, and he'll be able to dictate whether this fight takes place on the ground or on the feet. He's the type of striker who puts on the pressure from the get-go, and he comes out swinging with heavy hands because he's hunting for that early knockout, which is how he won 6 of his fights in round 1 in the regional scenes. But ever since he's made it to the UFC, he's been utilizing his wrestling more by shooting for takedowns, and he's shown us that he can also fight a dominant fight on the ground. The most adversity we saw him face was against Cody Brundage, where we saw him get taken down for the entirety of round 1, but he won't have to worry about takedowns in this fight because McConico is purely a striker. That's why I said that Johnson can decide where this fight takes place, because even though Johnson is more of a striker, we've already seen that he can wrestle, and we've also seen that McConico tends to struggle with defending takedowns. On the feet, I only favor Johnson early on in the fight because that's when he's most dangerous, and even though he keeps up a consistent pace, he tends to lose that pop in his shots the longer the fight goes because he tends to get tired. McConico, on the other hand, is more consistent with his striking, and I could actually see him start to take over in the striking exchanges if Johnson doesn't start to mix in his wrestling. But at the end of the day, I think that Johnson will fight the smarter fight by mixing in the takedowns and try to grind out a unanimous decision. Next up, we have a welterweight fight between Chidi and Joel Alverez, where I'm favoring Alverez to get the win. The reason I'm favoring Alverez to get the win here is because although Chidi is dangerous on the feet, he tends to rely completely on his kicking game, which is his biggest strength because he's got a very long legs and he uses them to manage the distance between him and his opponent. But other than that, he doesn't really pose any other threat, and he usually relies on his size advantage to bully his opponents, which is something that he can't do in this fight because Alverez is just as big as him. Alverez is the more complete fighter that's going to be able to keep this fight competitive in the striking exchanges and also mix in some takedowns to get this fight to the ground. That's where he's most dangerous because he's got 17 wins coming by way of submission. So obviously, Alverez is going to shoot for takedowns, and the only thing that he needs to look out for are Chidi's knees up the middle because he tends to throw that quite a lot. Chidi doesn't have the best submission defense, and so I reckon that once Alverez gets this fight grounded, it won't take long for him to find a submission, and I reckon he finds one in round 2. Next up, we have a lightweight bout between Esteben Ribovics and Edson Barboza, where I think that Esteben is going to get the win. This should be the end of Edson Barboza's career because he's already 40 years old, and although he still looks sharp and explosive in his last fight, he can't absorb damage as well as he used to. He's currently on a 3-fight losing streak in the UFC, and anytime he fights an opponent who's somewhat decent, he tends to lose. I just don't understand why he's still fighting because it's not like he's going to become a champion anytime soon, and the UFC are treating him more as a sacrificial lamb to try and build up the younger prospects. Just can't compete at this level anymore, and I think after he loses this fight, he'll more than likely retire. Esteben is the younger and faster striker who's currently in the prime of his career, and I think he's going to force Barboza to fight at a pace that he can't keep up with. So I reckon that Esteben is going to make this look easy by overwhelming Barboza on the feet, and he'll find a knockout in round 1. Next up, we have a middleweight bout between Dustin Stolzfus and Mansur Abdul Malik, where I think that Malik's going to get the win. In my opinion, Malik has looked very impressive and dangerous in all of his UFC fights, but that's mainly because he's been fighting the bottom barrel of the middleweight division. He was finally given a proper test in his last fight against Belgorod, where he got knocked out, and it feels like the UFC are back to giving him another easy opponent to try and build him back up. I really think that Malik has every advantage coming into this fight because he's the younger and hungrier fighter that's still in the prime of his career, while Dustin is currently on a 2-fight losing streak and he's shown signs of slowing down a lot in his last few UFC fights. I'm just not sure if Dustin is in the right mental space to overcome a prospect like Malik, who's already proven to be very dangerous by finishing all 9 of his opponents, with most of them coming in the first round. Dustin's approach is going to be to try and slow the pace by taking Malik down, and if he's lucky, maybe he can lock up a submission. But I think that Malik's natural athleticism will be enough to stop the takedowns and keep this fight standing. Given that we've already seen Dustin get hurt badly on the feet by less powerful strikers than Malik, I reckon that Malik will be able to hurt him badly and find an early knockout in round 1. Next up, we have a fight between Charles Johnson and Eduardo Chapelin, where I think that Johnson is going to get the win. I can't believe that this fight is a pick'em because although Johnson has lost a few fights, he's a proven UFC fighter with a lot of experience in the octagon that has fought the toughest fighters in the flyweight division. This will already be Johnson's 4th fight of the year, and staying that active is a huge advantage because he's already in shape and he's constantly working to improve his skill set against high-level competition. This is arguably his easiest fight this year because Eduardo has no UFC experience and he's making his UFC debut on only 4 days notice. This is going to be a pure striking fight which plays right into Johnson's favor because he doesn't need to worry about defending takedowns, so he can constantly move forward, apply pressure, and force Eduardo against the cage, which is where Johnson does his best work. And so to me, it's a no-brainer to take the fighter that's been more active, has more UFC experience, and has the longer reach in this fight. Eduardo has never been knocked out, and so I do think that he'll be able to survive all 3 rounds, but I do think that he's going to lose a decision. Just like that, we are in the co-main event of the evening where we have a women's strawweight fight between Mackenzie Dern and Gillian Robertson, where I think that Dern is going to get the win. She's not going to waste any time striking with Dern, and she's going to come out shooting for takedowns and try to hold Dern down for the majority of the rounds. But what I don't like is that sometimes she relies way too much on her wrestling to win fights, and she doesn't always do damage or threaten submissions on the ground. The judges nowadays are way more educated and they prioritize damage, so I can't trust that she'll win rounds despite having a lot of control time because Dern frequently threatens submissions off her back, and she's also the better striker in this matchup that's going to do damage before getting taken down. But I will say, even though Dern can grapple and has won fights against tougher grapplers like female Chiwiwi, I do think that she'll get taken down a lot in this fight. But I doubt that Robertson will be able to consistently take her down for 5 rounds, and I also trust that Dern is good enough to get back to her feet where she can land some more damage. So I reckon that Robertson may have a strong round 1, but ultimately Mackenzie Dern is going to do more in the fight and win a unanimous decision. And just like that, we are on the main event of the evening where we have a welterweight fight between Islam Makachev and Ian Garry, where I am obviously taking Makachev to get the win. Ian Garry made a strong point in one of his interviews where he said that he's beaten better opponents than Makachev has. And to be honest, I do agree with him because he's beaten Carlos Prates, MVP, but I'll remember the name Mohammed, and so on. But styles make matchups, and so far Ian has only really fought talented strikers, which is exactly where he thrives, and so he's not yet been tested by a proper wrestler. Yes, he did fight and beat the former champ Belal, but let's be real, Belal isn't in his prime anymore, and when's the last time we really saw him dominate a fight on the ground? Honestly, my biggest concern for Makachev was the height difference, and I don't know if he was wearing performance shoes or whatnot, but when they faced off, they seemed to be almost identically tall. And so I think that Ian's biggest advantage is not his height, but it's rather his fight IQ on the feet and obviously his range management, and he'll be able to use that the entire fight to try and pick his shots from the outside so that he can see when Makachev starts to shoot for takedowns. But at the end of the day, I think that Makachev is just too relentless with the takedown threats, and he'll be able to take Ian down eventually, where I think he'll find a submission in round 3. And so that's going to do it for my full card breakdown of UFC 330, Islam Makachev taking on Ian Garry. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram and leave a subscribe to my YouTube channel. Peace.